Okay, we're going to read the last few pages of Mesmerized. Go ahead and open up your book to page 42. Ooh la la, la science. Benjamin Franklin first used the scientific method when he was just a boy. He grew up in Boston by the ocean and loved to swim. Ben swam fast, but he observed that fish swam faster. He hypothesized that if he had fins like a fish, he could swim faster too. So he tested his hypothesis by making a pair of thin wooden fins that fit over his hands. They worked. Go ahead and look on the bottom. We're going to go over the scientific method. Benjamin Franklin lived from 1706 to 1790. The scientific method. 1. Ask yourself a question about something that you've observed. 2. Form a hypothesis, which is a smart guess, about the answer. Number 3. Test your hypothesis. Number 4. Observe the results and draw conclusions. If the results support your hypothesis, you're done. If they don't, revise your hypothesis and test again. On page 43, Ben went on to create many more inventions and conduct many more experiments. His report of flying a kite in a thunderstorm to draw down lightning made him the most famous American in the world. So, when the rebellious colonies needed to ask the King of France for help against their common enemy, Great Britain, it was clear that Ben should be the one to go. When Ben set sail for France in 1776, Ben was an old man. He suffered from gout and kidney stones. He had a double chin. Instead of a fashionable powdered wig, he wore a plain fur hat to cover his bald head. And yet the French treated Ben like a celebrity. Poets wrote verses in his honor. Fashionable ladies threw him parties and called him Mon cher papa, my dear papa. So many souvenirs were sold showing old Ben in his fur hat and bifocal glasses, his own invention, that he wrote home, "My face is now almost as well known as that of the moon." Ben Franklin's electricity wasn't the only mysterious force making a stir in France. Antoine Lavoisier, today known as the father of modern chemistry, dazzled audiences with demonstrations of invisible gases he named hydrogen and oxygen. And in 1783, Montgolfier brothers defied gravity with another force no one could see, hot air. Ben joined the eager crowd to see Montgolfier gas carry a giant balloon high over Paris. It landed in a field outside the city, where farmers took it for a flying monster and attacked it with pitchforks. Meanwhile, in Vienna, a doctor named Franz Mesmer was also experimenting with invisible forces by waving magnets at his patients. Often, after this treatment, they felt better. Since doctors at that time favored treatments such as bleeding and purging, Mesmer's patients may have gotten better simply because he didn't make them worse. And you can see there's a picture of Franz Anton Mesmer, who lived from 1734 to 1815. Let's go ahead and we're going to look at page 44, and we're going to read page 44 and 45 now. But even when he found he could help patients just as well without the magnets, Mesmer didn't question the healing power of magnetism. Instead, he announced that he had discovered a new type of magnetism. He called this force animal magnetism because it worked on living creatures just as ordinary magnets worked on metal. In 1778, Mesmer arrived in Paris, where he began treating patients at a fancy hotel. The room was dimly lit, the windows hung with heavy drapes covered in mystical signs. The only sound was the sweet, haunting music of the glass harmonica. This instrument, which Mesmer loved, happened to have been invented by Ben Franklin. The patients sat in silence, holding hands around a wooden tub with iron rods called a buquet. The room grew hot and airless as the hours passed. Tall and elegant in his purple silk coat and powdered wig, Mesmer circled the room. He stared into his patients' eyes. He waved his hand across their faces until one by one they fell into a trance. Mesmer's chief assistant and most enthusiastic supporter was Charles Delson, personal physician to the king's brother. But other doctors did not share this enthusiasm. Annoyed at patients who demanded the marvelous wand of Monsieur Mesmer, instead of regular medical treatments, they complained to the king. When King Louis XVI asked him to take charge of investigating, Dr. Mesmer, when King Louis XVI asked him to take charge of investigating Dr. Mesmer, Ben couldn't say no. The king had already sent aid to the struggling colonists, so Ben owed him a very big favor. And also Ben was curious. He'd lived a long time and had seen a lot of miracle cures come and go, but Mesmer's ideas were spreading like wildfire. Across the ocean, General George Washington learned about animal magnetism from one of Mesmer's followers, a young French officer named the Marquis de Lafayette. Even Ben's own grandson wrote to him from England to say that he had joined Mesmer's secret society. The king appointed a group of scientists and doctors to help Ben. This group included Antoine Lavoisier, the astronomer Jean-Sylvain Bailly, and Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotin, who was known for opposing the death penalty, but also proposed replacing nooses, axes, and swords with a quick, painless machine, which of course was called the guillotine. Later, during the French Revolution, Guillotine narrowly escaped being beheaded by the machine that bore his name. Bailly and Lavoisier were not so lucky. Neither were King Louis and Queen Marie Antoinette. The scientists began with a question: did Mesmer's invisible force actually exist? They soon discovered that their question couldn't be answered through observation. Animal magnetism did not shoot out sparks. It had no taste or smell. It could not be felt. And yet something was causing Mesmer's patients to burst out with piercing shrieks, tears, hiccups, and excessive laughter, as the scientists noted. Ben's gout made it impossible for him to go to Mesmer's clinic. He couldn't bear the jolting of a carriage ride, and Mesmer refused to go to him. But Charles Delson was happy to visit Ben's rented estate outside of Paris and demonstrate Mesmer's discovery to the scientists gathered there. When Ben suggested blindfolding the patients, his fellow scientists agreed right away. Lavoisier may even have come up with the idea first. Finding that imagination without magnetism produces convulsions, while magnetism without imagination produces nothing, they reported to the king that animal magnetism did not exist. The terrible active power at work on Mesmer's patients was their own imaginations. Charles was dismayed by these results. Still, he argued loyally, if the medicine of the imagination is best, why shouldn't we practice it? Mesmer, not so loyally, blamed Charles for doing it wrong. Neither of these arguments did any good. Mesmer's secret society soon fell apart. Mesmer returned to his birthplace in Germany. There he lived with a pet canary that woke him every morning by flying across the room and landing on his head. Before leaving France himself, Ben managed to squeeze in a little more science. He wrote a scientific paper pointing out that a heavy fog across Europe the previous summer had been followed by violent hailstorms that winter. He hypothesized that the two might be connected and suggested that his fellow scientists examine weather records from earlier years to put this hypothesis to the test. As for Ben, he had another job to do, helping to write a constitution for the new United States of America. All right, you may want to rewind this and replay different parts. That last few pages was pretty wordy and had a lot of information in there. So feel free to go back and listen to it again, listen to it with the other recordings to help you understand the main ideas, to use context clues to make inferences, and to answer your questions in your lessons.